Hey there, folks. How you doing today? Hope you're having an awesome day. Well, today we're going to do a little 2 for Tuesday, that open tag by that fine fella Tom over at Knife Delights. And we're going to have a look at a knife that's mine and a knife that was sent in by Mike from Rasputin's Castle. And we're going to be talking George Wostenholm I XL. So if you're interested, stick around and have a look. So this is the knife sent in by Mike, and he has labeled this a George Wostenholm 1950 to 1960. Comes in at 3 3/4 inches. And it has your standard clip point blade. This one has seen a lot of use. You see part of the etching is worn away there. Here's an example of what that etching originally looked like. Long nail nick. And you can see here in the tank stamp, IXL, George Wostenholm, Sheffield. And it's hard to make out, but it does say England below that. Knife still has great snap. No half stops, closed as well. And you have your sheep's foot blade, again with your tang stamp, IXL, George Wostenholm, Sheffield. You can see the England a little bit better here. And then your spade blade, again with your tang stamp. So a very well built knife, brass liner and dividers, steel springs. You've got your police shield, everything nicely recessed, no stepping, everything nice and smooth. You got your 3 pins holding your scales together. Everything nice and good in the channels. Nice blade alignment. Very well made. And in great shape for a knife that's what? Maybe 75 years old. Don't know what the cover material is. Likely synthetic. So just a very, very well made piece. Great piece of cutlery history. So on the note of history, the George Wostenholm brand was probably, if not globally, then certainly in England, one of the top producers of knives and razors. Started with the original George, because George had a son and a grandson, both named George. But started with the original George in 1785, and he produced knives in Shannington, England, which was fairly close to Sheffield. 1810, production moved to Sheffield, England, and they opened up the Rockingham Works plant. Now, the original Wostenholm name was spelled, as I'll include up here. But in the early 1800s, they shortened it by removing the first L and the E. And the story goes, as far as I can find, that this was done just to make it easier to fit it on a tank stamp. In 1831, the company was granted the trademark for the IXL, which apparently stands for IXL, as in I excel in making knives. Now, around this time, in the early 1830s, they began selling knives in the U.S. And that was such a boom for the company that in 1835, they opened up the Washington Works plant. And this was the largest production facility in Sheffield at the time and was employing about 800 people. Now, dating a Wostenholm knife. That, from my research, proves to be a little bit tricky. I couldn't find any tank stamp charts or dating mechanisms other than very early on. So we know in 1831 they were granted the trademark for IXL. So anything with IXL we can assume was 1831 and beyond. Now from 1810 to 1848, they used the Rockingham Works tank stamp. And that lines up with the period where they ran that facility. 1848 to the 1870s, when they ran the Washington Works plant, they used Washington Works on their tank stamp. 1860s into the 1890s, they used Wostenholm Celebrated Cutlery on their tank stamp. Now in 1890, the U.S. Tariff Act came in. So at that point, they had to start stamping their tank stamp with England. But really, that would only apply to knives they were selling in the U.S. So knives that were being produced for sale in other countries or through Europe wouldn't really need that England tank stamp. So it's possible you could have a knife made after the 1890s Tariff Act that wouldn't have England on it because it wasn't for sale in the U.S. So I don't know what criteria Mike used to come up with the 1950 to 1960 date. And hopefully I'll jump in on the comments and share that with us. But for the most part, what I've seen is most collectors refer to the quality of the knife. So how it was built, the general quality, that's what they go about to try and generalize a date for when the knife was made. So we do know in 1971, production under the Wostenholm family ceased, and the brand was picked up by Joseph Rogers. And it changed hands quite a few times in the late 20th century. But in 1978, Schrade bought the brand and began producing with the IXL. And that's where this knife comes in. So this is one I picked up earlier in the year. It was a knife commissioned to celebrate the Diamond Jubilee or 75th anniversary of the province of Alberta. And we can see here, Alberta Diamond Jubilee, 1905 to 1980. So that could possibly put it in the time frame when Schrade owned the rights to the brand. And if we flip over to the other side, we see limited edition Schrade IXL, Sheffield, England. So this would be a knife that would have been produced in Sheffield, England, because you can't put Sheffield, England on a knife that isn't produced in Sheffield, England. And it's Schrade and has the IXL. So this is a knife that I'm assuming would have been produced during that short period of time when Schrade had the ownership of the IXL and the George Wostenholm brand. This is a pretty nice knife. I was happy to pick this one up, not only for the Canadian historical significance, but for just the historical significance of the brand. And obviously this is a buck clone and fairly consistent with how a buck would have looked back around that time frame. I did a video last week showing off a buck 2-dot that I was able to date to 1977 to 1980, and very similar aesthetics. Same squared off design, squared off bolsters. Now you've got the stag here, so that's going to make a difference, but very similar in design to how a buck 110 would have been made at that time. But a very nice knife. That is the only IXL I have in my collection. So that's all I have to compare to, but if you have IXL knives in your collection or George Wostenholm knives in your collection, I'd love to hear about it. And if you know different than I do, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. So just a very well-made knife with a very cool history. Knife history is very fascinating. Just the people, the time frames, how things changed over time, how the war impacted production, and how ownership changed from time to time, and how some companies made knives under other companies' brands and vice versa. Knife history is really interesting. But that'll be it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video and the short little history lesson. If you have some cool IXL or George Wostenholm knives, I'd love to hear about it. And if you have any additional information or corrections to the information I provided, please put that in the comments below as well. So that'll be it for today. I hope you enjoyed. And like I always say, if you're having a bad day, go spend some time in the woods. Go hang out with the trees. Go listen to the birds. If you're going by yourself, tell somebody where you're going. And take a knife with you. Might just come in handy. You all take care.